Hello there, this is James Escrotty, Days 1978, and at the recommendation of my wonderful friend Reem, Lady Reems86, I've recently finished the audiobook version of And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini, a novel which, on paper at least, no pun intended, I should utterly despise, but one that instead I genuinely adore and recommend to everyone who watches this video. As always, the links are listed down as the underbar. Although she hasn't had the opportunity to upload anything for a long time now, I still ask everyone to please check out and subscribe to Reem's channel. And you see, for as long as I can remember, I've always despised the way that novels, movies and TV series drag on and on for no apparent reason, except perhaps to pad out the story, introducing subplots and tangents which have only the most superficial passing relevance to the main plot. You know, the actual story that we sometimes paid to read, hear or see. And even worse, spending paragraphs or even pages giving long, detailed descriptions of banal and incidental trivia, which again have only a superfluous connection to the actual story at best. In short then, for the first 2 decades of my life when I was reading, watching a movie or watching TV, I was essentially just acting out the infamous scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Do you think the scene should have been cut? We were so worried when the boys were writing it, but now we're glad. It's better than some of the previous scenes, I think.
At least ours was better visually.
At least ours was committed. It wasn't just a string of pussy jokes.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
Oh, I am enjoying this scene.
Get on with it.
As a result of this pet hatred, when I first began writing myself back in the year 2000, I cut out the trivia, I trimmed away the fat, and I got straight to the rabid hang-gliding point. Indeed, to this very day, the most common complaint I always receive as a writer is that my stories are too short, that they feel like the final scene of a movie and end suddenly once the climax has been reached. As a matter of fact, it seems that very few people share my hatred for barely relevant subplots and painstakingly detailed exposition in literature. However, this dislike seems to run much deeper than simple personal opinion. Although the common wisdom is that an author must always show, not tell, I could never understand why it is wrong to simply say that, for example, the character has a violent temper instead of spending 15 pages showing how she is quick to anger, especially when that minor character trait is irrelevant to the story itself. Honestly, do we need to know every detail of every minor supporting character's full backstory in order to find out whether the main characters will indeed live happily ever after? But now, though, listening to And the Mountains Echoed has finally shown me what so many people have been struggling to explain since I was a child, that rather than distract from the story, the subplots and apparently trivial details which I despise are intended to deepen our connection with the characters and the events, and beyond simply telling a story, such exposition is a means through which the author can invite us to explore ourselves and humanity through their words. Of course, the problem is that most fiction doesn't really explore anything. To quote Sturgeon's law, 90% of everything is crap, meaning that yes, as I look back on all of the books, movies, TV programmes and what have you that caused me to scream, "Get on with it!" when I was younger, the truth is that they were in fact padded with irrelevant banality, probably because, no different from a Hollywood studio remaking a great foreign film, reducing everything which made the original a masterpiece to crowd-pleasing tropes and cliches, creative writing classes and what have you teach authors to show, not tell, and to add detailed subplots and descriptions, but with no understanding of the creative vision which made such fiction work in the first place. In short, they're copying what made some fiction great, and few people ever complain because they now expect all literature to drift aimlessly and spend an entire chapter panning out the backstory of one character who has almost no connection to the main plot. However, every once in a while, a great novelist like Khaled Hosseini does manage to achieve the full potential of this kind of storytelling. At its heart and soul, in fact, And the Mountains Echoed is a true exploration of humanity, asking why it is that we choose to do what we do, but never giving any real answers. In most of the chapters, a character is faced with the fundamental question of what to do when a loved one, or at the very least someone to whom they feel obligated, becomes a burden in one form or another, compelling them to make a decision that will change their lives forever. Do they stay with them, sacrificing everything, or do they leave and live their own lives? Naturally, the first and most obvious answer is for the character in question to stay, but as the book points out in the later chapters especially, the ones who do stay are perhaps equally as self-motivated and as cowardly as the people who leave. In fact, as one character explains in chapter 8, it is our fears which guide and govern our lives far more than our desires, with one person leaving because of the fear of being trapped, while another stays because of fear of the unknown. In chapter 9 as well, one character describes herself as being like a fish living in an aquarium, the glass representing the obligation that she feels to her parents, watching the world but never being a part of it, and living in fear of the day when the glass will finally break and she will be left flapping and gasping on the floor, unable to cope. Although we'd expect the people who walk away to suffer or be punished in some fashion, while the noble saints who stay to care for their loved ones receive some kind of reward, just as in real life, who suffers and who does not in this book appears to be entirely arbitrary and random. There is no grand purpose or design, no moral or message which will make us all better people. Instead, only explorations of the characters' lives, of what they did and what they failed to do, of their motivations, their desires, and the choices which shaped their futures, as well as the lives of people who they never even met, causing us to wonder what we would do in their place, because after all, it's not entirely cut and dried. Anything can be rationalised, and the decision which hurts us all the most now could possibly lead to the best consequences for everyone later on. To paraphrase one line from the mythical story told by Abdullah's father, which takes up the bulk of the first chapter in this book, cruelty and kindness are both different shades of the same colour. As another aspect of the exploration of humanity in this book, 4 of the characters feel rightly guilty, 2 for their actions, 1 for his inactions, and 1 for the actions of his father. But as before though, none of them are really punished or are made to suffer by other people as a result. Instead, 3 of the characters, especially the son of the war criminal, make me think of Captain Sisko's monologue at the end of one of my favourite episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So I lied. I cheated. I bribed men to cover the crimes of other men. I am an accessory to murder. And the most damning thing of all, I think that I can live with it. Once again, the book challenges us, though. Are we honestly any better? On what grounds do we judge or condemn these people when we are equally flawed? And in the case of the war criminal's son in particular, what can he possibly do about his father's crimes? What options does he have except simply to learn how to live with it? When approaching this book, then, my advice is to view it less as a novel and more as an anthology of 9 stories which have a common thread running through them. After all, each of the 9 chapters is one person's story, told from his or her own perspective, and demonstrating the principle of 6 degrees of separation. Some of the characters have a major impact upon the main story, sometimes without them even realising it, while other characters have a minor but no less significant effect. Indeed, the only comparison to this novel that I can possibly draw is with the TV series Babylon 5, because as far as I'm aware, it's the only other example of a tapestry of individual stories being woven together to create a whole far greater than the sum of its parts, meaning that just as with Babylon 5, any attempts to describe or explain the individual stories or the connecting thread would be like analysing the colours and the brushstrokes of a painting, a factually accurate yet meaningless description of details which completely misses the entire point of what the creator was trying to convey. As a matter of fact, at the risk of sounding even more like a pretentious snob than I already do, I would say that And the Mountains Echoed is an experience more than it is a simple story, because as with any other experience, what you gain from it will largely depend upon how much you are willing to put in. That is to say, if you are merely looking for a novel to read passively while on the beach or before you go to sleep, then you'll probably feel frustrated and give up around chapter 6, because sadly, the constant changes in perspective, shifting from past to present, and the abruptness of some of the dialogue can make it quite difficult to follow, whereas if you are willing to take a step back, to think, feel and question, and as I said before, to regard it as an exploration of humanity, then I'm certain that this brief glimpse into the characters' lives will stay with you and shape the way that you think and feel for a very long time to come.